Hey guys, welcome back to History and Stitches. Today I'm making a video for our new crocheters out there. I'm going to go over 5 kind of tips to help you as you get started crocheting to make things easier on yourself and make sure you're buying the right things and just kind of give you some general advice for if you're just getting started. So we're going to talk today about selecting yarn, selecting hooks, what stitches you're using, what patterns you're using, and then about kind of building a community. So let's start with yarn. Couple things that I would suggest as a new crocheter. Number 1, if you're starting a project, I would use a light colored yarn. So you can see on this one, it's light colored and you can really see all of the stitches. You can see what you're doing, see how you're working. Makes it so much easier when you're first starting out to count stitches and know where you're putting the next stitch, all of that. Check out this light colored yarn versus this. This is almost the same stitch. It's a little bit smaller of a hook, but same kind of stitch. Look how hard that is to see on this one. Even me as a fairly advanced crocheter, I do not like working with this yarn because it's just so dang hard to see. So pick a light colored yarn. Also, when you're walking around the yarn store, I know you want all the things, and that is definitely part of crocheting. You will get all the yarns. But as you're first starting, I would keep it real simple. I would go to Walmart and buy the Walmart brand yarn. And what I'm talking about here is like this, like the mainstays or like Red Heart, something real cheap and real basic. And the reason for that is this is kind of a medium texture. It's not too slippery, it's not too rough. Pretty much any hook you use is going to work all right on this. You will see things like this, which is a blanket yarn. It's very nice and very soft, but it is difficult. When you try and pull this yarn through a stitch you've made, it can kind of get caught up and the yarn can kind of break apart. This can be difficult. And the other side of that is this, which is really silky, can also be difficult because this will slip all over a hook and it makes it hard to get your tension right and everything like that because you're just slipping around. This one here is in the middle and it makes it real easy to do with pretty much any hook you've got. The other reason is that this is cheap. You're going to spend about, I don't know, $5 to get a skein like this. And what you're going to find is as you start to crochet, you are going to end up ripping it out and putting it back together and ripping it out. And as you do that, you're going to notice that the yarn starts to kind of separate. And so what's going to happen is you're going to look and it's going to split. So you're going to pull a stitch through and at some point you're going to end up with like one strand of this yarn kind of sticking out weird because you've used it so much. When that happens, I highly suggest pulling a little more out of the skein and cutting it and just going on deeper in the skein because fighting that splitting is just not worth it. And if you bought a really expensive yarn, it's going to be harder to make yourself waste all that yarn. So I would definitely start with a cheap yarn. You're going to frog it. You're going to mess it up. Start cheap, get into your expensive yarns later. As far as hooks go, you have a world of options for your hooks. You've probably seen plastic hooks, metal hooks, wooden hooks, all kinds of different hooks. And you're going to find that hooks are going to be a very personal preference. Okay, so let me show you some of the options we've got. We've got all kinds of different handles. We've got plastic sparkly handles. We've got regular plastic handles. We got big fat handles, ergonomic handles, wooden handles, all kinds of different tips with just wood or plastic or whatever. It's going to depend on your personal preference, but it's going to also depend on your project. So if you're using one of these rough yarns, you're going to want something that moves really nicely through the yarn. So you're probably going to want a metal hook. If you're using a very silky yarn like this, you're going to want something that catches that yarn a little bit more. So you might want like a rougher plastic or even a wooden tip to do this project. So think about what yarn you're using and then base your hook choice on that. Your handle choice is going to be total personal preference. These are my most favorite ones. These ergonomic handles here, love these. They make my hand feel so much better. I have some of these too that are kind of fat all the way. For me, not my favorite. I don't like these as much as I do these. Did not like the wooden handle very much at all. It didn't give me much support, and it was thin enough that it still made my hand cramp. And then we just get worse from there, right? Like, you probably, when you started crocheting, went out and bought a bunch of these, which are totally fine to learn on. But you're going to see, if you make a blanket or a bigger project, your hand's probably going to start to cramp with these. So I would get you one of these, maybe one of these, one of the wooden ones, and just see what you like better before you go out and buy a whole set. Now, I will say that my husband bought me this here. This is like the greatest gift I have ever received in my entire life. It is a little bag, and it has all of these hooks in it. They're all this soft ergonomic handle that I like. It also came with a little scissors and some nice metal tapestry needles and some stitch markers, all in this bag, and it was like $18. So I'm going to put a link to this down in the comment section so that if you are interested and you know you like these ergonomic handles, you can find it, because best thing ever. They were so cheap and they actually work really well. The other thing that you may not know when you get started is that there's different hook types, and this it's also a personal preference, but you've got a tapered hook and an inline hook. And you can see this one is called an inline hook because it's kind of the same size the whole way up. This one kind of changes sizes. You can see as it goes up, it gets a little thinner. Inline hooks are supposed to be really good when you're first starting because they help you keep the tension right and keep all of your stitches the same size. Tapered hooks supposedly are better if you like them better or as you're a more advanced crocheter. I will tell you, I hate these. I absolutely hate inline hooks. And the reason is this, is you can see this one is more round, and this one, it's kind of sharp right here. These inline hooks can get kind of sharp. I have a heck of a time with these because I find I split my yarn all of the time. So even when I was starting, I used these tapered hooks. Again, it's totally a personal preference, but if you are struggling with your project, especially if you're splitting yarn, take a look at your hook and make sure that you don't have an inline one. If you don't like the way your project's going, try a different hook and see if it makes it better for your hand cramps or for your spacing or for anything. Hooks can make a big difference when you're crocheting. Next thing I want to talk about is your stitches. Okay, so as a beginning crocheter, you just want to get in there and crochet, right? You're like, ooh, I got the single crochet down. I'm just going to go back and forth, make this big old thing. And then you get a chunk of your project done and you realize that it looks like this, or like this, or like this. And the reason is because you maybe aren't counting your stitches. So I'm going to tell you, as a crocheter that's been doing this for a little while, count your daggum stitches. I know it seems like a pain, but counting your stitches is going to take you a lot less time than frogging it all and going back and doing it again. Even as somebody that's, I could double crochet this in my sleep, and I still, after every few rows, make sure, okay, am I still on the right number of stitches? Because that's going to make your project look nicer when your ends are all nice and lined up. A lot of projects are going to call for you to use stitch markers, and that is very helpful when you're counting your stitches. But I will caution you on two things about stitch markers. First of all, make sure you're getting crochet stitch markers. There are crocheters and there are knitters. Knitters can use crochet stitch markers. It's fine. Crocheters cannot use knitters stitch markers. And this is why. Because when you are knitting, I know these are crochet hooks, but you're doing this and you're putting your work on this needle and then you're slipping it back to this needle. So you're going back and forth the whole time. So a knitter's marker can be a closed loop like this. You can't open it. And that's because you can just slip it from one hook to the next and it's not a problem. You cannot do that with crochet. So when you get markers for crochet, make sure they open. These are a pretty basic kind like this. They open just like little safety pins. You can even use a little safety pin. But make sure whatever you get to mark your work will open, because you're going to have to take it out of your work. You can't just use a closed loop. The other thing I will say with stitch markers, and I have not run into this problem as much as my sister, But my sister makes these huge giant blankets, and they have all this like intarsia crochet, and she's constantly using a bunch of different stitch markers. And she has told me that when she does that, she very much prefers the plastic stitch markers to the metal stitch markers. Because I've got these real cute ones here that are paw prints. I know you're surprised, but they're metal. And she says when she uses the metal markers, if she's using more than one or two, she finds that that metal is heavy enough that it pulls on her work and kind of warps her work a little bit. So if you're doing something that uses more than one or two stitch markers, I would go out and make sure you get the plastic ones. Okay, next tip is how you pick your pattern. So I know that you have picked out a bazillion patterns on Etsy already that you want to try. And I'm going to caution you that for your first project, just keep it simple, okay? I know a ton of people have learned to do these things, these little amigurumi things, and these are fantastic and awesome. But especially as a crochet person I'm not a spring chicken, okay? I wear glasses. I struggle with these sometimes because they're so small that I can't quite see what I'm doing, and my hands don't work quite the same way, and it makes it hard to get these teeny tiny things done. These are great. These are awesome if you've done one of these little woobles, or even like I got this for Christmas, this crochet kit. If you have started these and tried them and you're having fun with them, awesome, great. But if you're not, go back to something simple. Find a simple pattern that's like a basic square, or a circle is a little more difficult, but square, rectangle is a good start. Try and get one with straight edges, just using single crochet, double crochet, not a lot of color changes, not a lot of increases or decreases. I'd also suggest finding one that uses a hook that's somewhere between a 5mm and an 8mm. And that's just because the smaller your hook gets, the more difficult it gets to see where you're putting all of these stitches. And the bigger your hook gets, it makes it a little more difficult to find the right tension. Like your hook is so big and you're making these spaces in your stitches so big that things kind of end up more like almost looking like a net. And sometimes it's hard to see where you're going. Okay, so straight lines, not a lot of color changes, not a lot of increases or decreases. Hook size is important, I think, when you're starting. Now, there's a lot of things you can do with that. You can make scarves and blankets, and we have the pattern on our channel. There's one for crab rangoon and one for a hat that are both very simple, that you can start with very easily and still make something very cool. So pick your pattern wisely, and then with your second pattern, maybe try something new. Be like, ooh, this one has increases and decreases, and try that, okay? So pick your pattern and don't get frustrated if it's too difficult. Step back a little bit and do an even simpler pattern. There's plenty of cool stuff out there that you can practice with. Tip number 5 is to ask for help. So first of all, I would suggest find your people, right? Whether that's online or in person. There are lots of online communities for people that love to knit and crochet, and a lot of those communities actually meet in person. If you just search up on Facebook, like in Kansas City, we have the Kansas City Knit and Crochet Club. It's fantastic. People get up there and ask questions of each other and give each other advice, and then they do meetups in different parts of town. And you don't have to know anybody. Just go and bring your project. And if you are stuck on a stitch or stuck on a pattern or just need help, there's lots of people there that have been doing it for a very long time and are very willing to help you figure it out. So find your people, whether it's online or in person. And then I would also suggest finding a channel you like. Now, it doesn't have to be my channel. We have some stitch tutorials up here as well. But there are plenty of channels on YouTube that will teach you how to crochet. I would suggest you find a channel that has visuals that you can engage with, and that the people explain it and do it at a speed that you understand. That way, if you're having a problem with a particular stitch, if you're like, I don't know how to do a half double crochet increase, you can get on there anytime, day or night, and look up a tutorial and figure out how to do it. Okay, so find a real person community, online or in person, and then find a channel that you like that you can get some advice from. And then bonus tip number 6, I'm just going to tell you, don't give up. All right, it's difficult when you start. If you think you're going to enjoy it, keep going. When I teach my classes, I always tell people, the longer you do it, it's going to get easier. And it's easier because the more you practice, right, you're going to get neater at your stitches. Your tension is going to be right. When your tension is right and your stitches are neater, it makes everything easier to count. Everything gets straight and easier to see, and everything looks nicer and it's not tangled. So the more you practice, even with just basic stitches, even if you're just making pot holders with single crochet, that is awesome and that is fantastic. And the more you practice, the easier it's going to get. So stick with it and just have fun with it, okay? If you guys have questions about a certain stitch, or there's something you can't find online, or you have questions, just comment below. I'm happy to help you out. Otherwise, I'd love to see your first time projects. You can post pictures of them below too. And if you like those hooks I showed you, I'll put that link in the comment section so you can have them for yourself. All right, I'll see you next time.